Good morning, one and all.
Good morning.
Welcome, welcome, welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Vero Beach. My name is Paul Amaru. I serve this congregation as Secretary to the Board of Trustees, but this morning it's my pleasure to serve as pulpit host for our speaker, the Reverend Marni Harmony. Marni Harmony has had a wonderful, varied career. She has served as a hospital chaplain, a college chaplain, a psychotherapist, and a Vista volunteer. Volunteers in Service to America, in case you forgot. She has served as UU minister to congregations from Wisconsin to Florida, and now serves as a regional transition coach for the Southern region and on the board of the UU Retired Ministers and Partners Association. She makes her home in Orlando with her spouse Nancy and animal companion Finn. She eats lots of vegetables. She loves Irish whistle. And she has a penchant for pie and chocolate. We gather today to worship, our hearts alive with hope that here we will be truly seen, that here we will be welcomed into the garden of this community, where the simple and the elegant, the plain and the fancy, the shy and the dramatic complement one another and are treasured. May we know that here, each contributes in their way to the beauty of the whole. Let us worship together, all genders, sexualities, progressives, conservative. May we root ourselves in the values of this faith: compassion and courage, transcendence, justice, and love. Whether it's your first time with us or you have been coming for years, we hope that you'll find here questions that stretch you, people to befriend you, and liberal religious values that challenge you to join us in loving justly and welcoming openly.
My opening words are a poem of Rumi's. This being human is a guest house, every morning a new arrival. A joy, a depression, a meanness, some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all, even if they're a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture. Still, treat each guest honorably. Each may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whoever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. The words of Rumi. May we join together in the words of the chalice lighting. May the light which is before us nurture and sustain the light within us. My first reading is from the book of Genesis. The Lord appeared to Abraham by the oaks of Mamre, and as he sat at the entrance of his tent in the heat of day, he looked up and saw 3 men standing near him. When he saw them, he ran from the tent entrance to meet them and bowed down to the ground. And he said, "My Lord, if I find favor with you, do not pass by your servant. Let a little water be brought, and wash your feet, and rest yourselves under the tree. Let me bring a little bread that you may refresh yourselves, and after that you may pass on, since you have come to your servant. And so they said, "Do as you have said." And Abraham hastened into the tent to Sarah and said, "Make ready quickly 3 measures of choice flour. Knead it and make cakes." Abraham ran to the herd and took a calf, tender and good, and gave it to the servant who hastened to prepare it. Then he took curds and milk and the calf that he had prepared and set it before them, and he stood by them under the tree while they ate. The second reading, Mullah Nasruddin and the Guest. On another occasion, the mullah was visited by an old friend from his own village of Konya who had brought him chicken as a gift. The mullah had his wife prepare the chicken with rice and vegetables, and when the meal was over, the guest declared it the most delicious he had ever tasted. And then the two friends passed the evening pleasantly, exchanging stories of their youth. When Nasruddin's friend returned to Konya, he told his neighbors what a fine host the mullah had been. And the following night, a man appeared at the door whom the mullah had never seen before. "I am an old friend of your childhood companion," the man explained, and the mullah welcomed him and invited him in to dine. The two passed the evening in conversation, and presently the meal was served, consisting of a rich soup made from the remains of the chicken his friend had brought. And when his guest returned to Konya, he quite naturally corroborated the account of the mullah's hospitality. And the next evening, another guest appeared at the doorstep. "I am a friend of your childhood companion," the man said, and the mullah invited him in. Again, a pleasant evening was spent, followed by a meal consisting of a somewhat thin broth made from what remained of the previous night's rich soup. The guest, with many thanks, returned to Konya, and the next night, yet another stranger appeared at the mullah's doorstep. "I am a friend of your childhood companion," the stranger declared. The mullah, never refusing to give hospitable welcome, invited him in. In due course, the meal was served, consisting of a bowl of warm water. "But what is this?" asked the stranger. "It is the soup of the soup of the soup of the chicken," was the answer of the mullah. So in the practice of Zen, we call our place of formal practice a zendo. Now, there's a very specific way that you enter a zendo. Bowing before entering, starting with the left foot, walking counterclockwise, bowing to one's cushion before seating, and you never, ever arrive late. It's all part of training the mind. So let's just suppose that a group of us has arrived and we've taken our seat on our cushions. And the bell is rung and we've begun a period of meditation. After about 10 minutes, a hooded figure arrives at the open door. The guy doesn't bow, he doesn't pause, he just starts walking across the middle of the floor. But as he walks, his footprints leave pools of light. And as his hood falls backward, you realize that it is Shakyamuni Buddha himself. But here's the thing. He has absolutely no idea what the proper form is in a zendo. So he sits down, but then the bell rings and the announcement is made to prepare for service. Chanting books are passed out, and again, there is a very specific way that one holds the books. but the Buddha has no idea what it is. No clue. And if we're chanting in Japanese or English, he won't even be able to chant, though the words are presumably from him. Try to picture what happens when it comes time to eat. There is a particular style of eating called oryoki that involves a rather intricate practice with nesting bowls and tied cloths and what food goes into which bowl, numerous things to remember. And the Buddha is completely lost. But the thing is, he sure knows how to sit. He absolutely knows the heart of practice. So why am I telling this story? This is how I often see our churches, especially when it comes to hospitality. We actually do have ways of doing things, and newcomers can be very lost, though they bring the same spiritual hunger, the same longing for meaning that we all have. His Holiness the Dalai Lama talks about spiritual democracy, that everyone has the same desire for and right to happiness. Buddhism has taught me to regard everything as practice, whether it's the newcomer who has no idea what Unitarian Universalism is, or it's a service or a vote that doesn't go the way I'd hoped, or it's a difficult member being difficult again. The discipline of learning the art of practice is good and helpful. In Greek, the word for stranger is xenos, a word we have heard with far too much frequency these past few years. Xenophobia, fear of the stranger or of foreigners. Immediately after the attacks of September 11th, it seemed that the most compelling response was to want to unite and stand strong as a country. But then, slowly the energy shifted and we began to focus on who's in and who's out, who's one of us and who's a stranger, a foreigner, an immigrant, an alien. And alas, 16 years later, hate speech about those who aren't us continues, and the gross generalizations offered do little to further understanding. More than anything, they fan the flames of the racism and xenophobia that have been part of some of the most painful chapters in our nation's history, as well as, frankly, an undercurrent all along. Among too many in our country, ethnic fears and nationalistic sentiment abounds. And along with these ethnic eruptions, we witness the ongoing controversy over issues of immigration and political asylum. The boat is full, is the message being sent too often. We cannot or will not support any more immigrants. No more foreigners welcome. No more illegal aliens. No more strangers welcome. The struggle over immigration reform continues front and center, giving us a colorful display of the anti-immigrant sentiment in this country. Recently, I listened to an edition of On Being that included an excerpt from a speech that Frederick Douglass delivered on July 5th, 1852, at Corinthian Hall in Rochester, New York. Now, Douglass was, of course, talking about slavery. Fast forward 165 years, and just imagine how these words read, these words of Frederick Douglass, if you change the subject to undocumented immigrants. Oh, and up the number reference from 3 million to 12 million. The words of Frederick Douglass. Remember, undocumented immigrants. Americans, you boast of your love of liberty, your superior civilization, and your pure Christianity, while the whole political power of the nation is solemnly pledged to support and perpetuate the enslavement of 3 million of your countrymen. You invite to your shores fugitives of oppression from abroad, but the fugitives from your own land you advertise, hunt, arrest, shoot, and kill. You're all on fire at the mention of liberty for France or for Ireland, but are as cold as an iceberg at the thought of liberty for the enslaved of America. You can bare your bosom to the storm of British artillery to throw off a 3-penny tax on tea, yet wring the last hard-earned farthing from the grasp of the black, read undocumented now, laborers of your country. You profess to believe, quote, that of one blood God made all nations to dwell on the face of the earth, and have commanded all everywhere to love one another, yet you notoriously hate all those whose skins are not colored like your own. For the most part, it seems we have come to view the stranger as foreign and extending that as the enemy. Responding to the stranger with apprehension, suspicion, fear probably is the norm in our society, certainly exasperated by the current, am I allowed to say this, administration. Xenos we've heard most in the concept of xenophobia. But there is another Greek word that includes xenos, the word philoxenia, or love of strangers. Philoxenia was considered a sacred virtue during the Homeric age. Zeus was actually often referred to as Xenios Zeus, the stranger's god. It is not just ancient Greece, but other cultures as well that have a different understanding of strangers and the way to respond to strangers. So I shared with you this morning a story from Genesis, the first biblical reference to the sacred relationship between homesteader and guest. Old Abraham is sitting out by a tree in front of his tent, dealing with the midday heat, perhaps enjoying the view, maybe thinking about the chores that he had yet to do. Out of the corner of his eye, he notices 3 strangers approaching. Now, does he yell, "Freeze!" and pull out his .44 Magnum pistol? No. He bows and urges them to accept his hospitality. He shares the shade of the oak, offers them water to wash their feet, makes a meal of calf and cakes and curds and milk, and then serves them and stands by while they enjoy his gifts. Abraham treats them as if they are God-sent, as if they are messengers of God. He honors the strangers. Now, I'm really not going to stand up here this morning and suggest, as a theology of the stranger, that we start regarding all strangers as God-sent and that we ask them into our homes and offer to share all we have. Unfortunately, our culture is such that that would be foolish. Too often we would be taken advantage of and risk harm. And it pains me to have to say that. I don't want that to be true. When I was exploring home security systems, the 2 companies that I called not only gave me the name of the person who would be coming, but assured me that this person would have a picture ID. Well, of course. But you know, it just hadn't occurred to me that someone would drive up in a company vehicle at the correct appointment time and not be a true representative. I guess that I long for a time that really doesn't exist anymore. Writes Mary Oliver in her poem of the Empire, We will be known as the culture that feared death and adored power, that tried to vanquish insecurity for the few and cared little for the penury of the many. We will be known as a culture that taught and rewarded the amassing of things, that spoke little, if at all, about the quality of life for other people, for dogs, for rivers. All the world in our eyes, they will say, was a commodity. And they will say that this structure was held together politically, which it was. And they will say also that our politics was no more than an apparatus to accommodate the feelings of the heart, and that the heart in those days was small and hard and full of meanness. That's Mary Oliver. Small, hard, and full of meanness. It is painful to sit with that description, which can feel so very true as I listen to the political rhetoric of our day. In any case, I don't suppose we can be Abraham these days, and so I included the second story this morning about Mullah Nasruddin and his wise response to having his hospitality abused. I think that there is some middle place between xenophobia and philoxenia, some place between fear and love of strangers, a place we would do well to explore personally and as a faith community. I'd like us to look at this concept of the stranger through slightly different lenses than our usual ones. So let me switch to language that reflects Indo-European concepts and look at the word hosti. It becomes the root of the word host, hospital, hospitality, and guest. And additionally, the same word, hosti, means stranger. I find this very interesting. Guest and host are referred to by the same word. Giving and receiving become the same thing. In many of the so-called primitive cultures, the stranger is welcomed as an honored guest, because though the stranger may be an enemy, he or she may also be a god in disguise. In the Greek Orthodox tradition, there is a place set at the table of religious feasts that is reserved for the stranger and the wayfarer. The rule of hospitality is that the stranger is understood as being sent from God and is to be received unconditionally. The stranger stands as a kind of sacred reflection of the truth in life that we all share. We are here as guests. We are guests of earth. We are guests of life. We do not own the earth or own life. We are guests. Welcoming the stranger, the guest, is a way of saying thank you for what has been offered to us. Just think for a moment about how far this consciousness is from how civilized people have treated those whose lands they have explored in pursuit of power or wealth. From our own continent to lands around the globe, there has certainly been little thought historically of being guests of an indigenous race. In cutting ourselves off from the other, the world then easily becomes something we can use in an egocentric, greedy way. We become a kind of enemy of the earth, consuming its resources unmindfully, wasting the resources, thinking only of our own needs at the time. We assume the role of stranger as enemy, rather than stranger as guest and messenger. All of us here have had both the experience of being the stranger and of finding ourselves having to respond to the stranger. We have the consciousness of the stranger when we do not feel at home with commonly accepted practices, when we do not even have knowledge of what common or appropriate behavior in a particular group or setting is, when we need someone to reach out and help us or invite us in, and no one does, when we feel we are somehow standing a bit outside the community. Over the years, I've certainly heard many stories about people's first experience of coming into a Unitarian Universalist church. Though I certainly don't know all of you, I'm sure there are some who can relate. You come as a stranger, found a community of faith different, quite different from what you had been used to. The forms, the rituals, certainly the music and way of being together as worshiping community was different from other churches. Should you stand up and be recognized as a newcomer if asked? Is it really okay to laugh here? Will you be welcome at the events listed in the church calendar? What do people do during coffee hour? And so on. You came as a stranger needing the hospitality extended to an honored guest. Each one of us here has had that experience, whether in this church or another church or someplace else. We walk into a new, strange place, pours our heart wide open, wanting someone to reach out and invite us in, make it safe for us in a new place. And we have all had the experience of confronting the stranger. Someone unfamiliar, unknown, walks into our world and demands some sort of response from us. We have to respond when we often do not know how to respond. We honestly do not know if they are an enemy, someone who intends no good, or if they are an indifferent stranger who simply shares our path for a while, or if they are in fact a messenger come to teach us something important. Shall we host this stranger in our lives, or will we turn our backs? We make these decisions almost daily in our personal lives. So I want to turn a bit of attention to how this relates to tasks for the church. And I want to lean a bit on the work of Dutch Catholic theologian Henri Nouwen. In a book first published over 20 years ago called Reaching Out, Nouwen outlines what he terms 3 movements of the spiritual life. The second movement, reaching out to other human beings, he calls the movement from hostility to hospitality. And here's just a brief quote from that section. In our world full of strangers, estranged from their own past, culture, and country, from their neighbors, friends, and family, from their deepest self and their God, we witness a painful search for a hospitable place where life can be lived without fear and where community can be found. Although many, we might even say most, strangers in this world become easily the victims of fearful hostility, it is possible for men and women to offer an open and hospitable space where strangers can cast off their strangeness and become our fellow human beings. The movement from hostility to hospitality is hard and full of difficulties. Our society seems to be increasingly full of fearful, defensive, aggressive people, anxiously clinging to their property. This was 20 years ago. I'm sorry, I gotta do it again. Just picture our president. Increasingly full of fearful, defensive, aggressive people, anxiously clinging to their property and inclined to look at their surrounding world with suspicion, always expecting an enemy to suddenly appear, intrude, and do harm. But still, Henri Nouwen says, that is our vocation, to convert the hostess to hospice, the enemy into a guest, and to create the free and fearless space where brotherhood and sisterhood can be formed and fully experienced. So, the movement from hostility to hospitality, which my heart must do as well, a movement from fear and suspicion to welcome and openness to the guest. Hospitality becomes more than anything an attitude toward other human beings, toward the stranger and the guest. Hospitality involves creating a space the stranger can enter and feel welcomed as a friend rather than an enemy. It does not ask the guest to become just like the host, but rather creates the space for that a stranger can enter and feel welcomed as a friend rather than an enemy. It does not ask the guest to become just like the host, but creates a space for the guest to come freely, to be who he or she is, and still have room to change if that's what the guest wants to do. The essence of hospitality, writes Parker Palmer, is that we let our differences, our mutual strangeness, be as they are, while still acknowledging the unity that lies beneath them. So now back to Abraham, offering his hospitality to the three strangers. As it turned out, the three were indeed messengers from God, coming to tell Abraham that his wife Sarah would give birth to a son, something they had all but given up hope of ever happening. Now that's probably not a theology most of us here are especially comfortable with, but think about the larger possibility of it. Consider the possibility that when we move from hostility to hospitality, it becomes much more likely that the stranger, the guest, will be able to reveal whatever promise, whatever gift they may be carrying with them. And whatever that is, may be the very thing that we have been seeking, the very thing that will open and heal some part of our lives, the very thing that will enrich and expand who we are as persons and as a faith community. So, knowing that all of us are well familiar with palmetto bugs, as we call them down here, I found this poem by Muriel Rukeyser called Saint Roach, and I couldn't resist it as a closing. For that I never knew you, I only learned to dread you. For that I never touched you, they told me you are filth. They showed me by every action to despise your kind. For that I saw my people making war on you, I could not tell you apart one from another. For that in childhood I lived in places clear of you. For that all the people I knew met by you, crushing you, stamping you to death. They poured boiling water on you, they flushed you down. For that I could not tell one from another, only that you were dark, fast on your feet and slender. Not like me. For that I did not know your poems, and that I do not know any of your sayings, and that I cannot speak or read your language, and that I do not sing your songs, and that I do not teach your children to eat your food, or know your poems, or sing your songs. But that we say, you are filthing our food, but that we know you not at all. Yesterday I looked at one of you for the first time. You were lighter than the others in color. That was neither good nor bad. I was really looking for the first time. You seemed troubled and witty. Today I touched one of you for the first time. You were startled. You ran. You fled away. Fast as a dancer, light, strange and lovely to touch. I reach. I touch. I begin to know you. And now may you go in peace, go making peace, live kindly, love mightily, view the world through the eyes of compassion, and with a global heart, and always, always bow to the mystery.